We need more women. We need more people of color. We need more folks from all financial walks of life. And we need those diverse individuals participating in the conversation to help build our city, our province, and our country in a way that works for everyone.
Welcome to the Pink Tax Podcast, a no-nonsense podcast for millennial women, building wealth and smashing the patriarchy, $1 at a time. With your hosts, Janine and Tara.
Hi, Janine.
Hey, Tara.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. We're here with Ms. Anna Murphy. Thank you for joining us, Anna. It's really good to have you on.
Well, thank you so much, Tara and Janine, for the invitation to join you for a conversation on the Pink Tax Podcast. It is an absolute pleasure, and I have been so looking forward to it.
Awesome. So tell us and our listeners a little bit about yourself. You're thinking about running for politics within the Calgary area. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. I mean, my journey began, which actually that kind of sounds like we're about to embark upon the reading of a fairy tale, to which my life most certainly is not. And if it is, I'm still, waiting for the handsome Prince Charming to show up. Clearly, he missed his entrance cue. But I digress. Really, my story kind of begins with growing up in rural Alberta. And I say with great pride that I am Albertan. My roots are planted in values which living on a ranch and having a cowboy as a dad provided me with. So things such as hard work, determination, grabbing life by the horns, which when you grow up on a ranch, sometimes that actually is literal. I'm proud of my roots. It most certainly was not always the case, being labeled as a quote unquote other, or being perceived as different or not fitting into the norm. So it most certainly was not always something which I found pride in, especially again, when you're growing up and all you wanted was to be somewhere where you felt like you belonged. However, as the years have kind of sort of passed and I've grown into myself, have very much realized, who I am is due to being that country girl at heart. And then if you fast forward to kind of a present day life, which is quite contrast, which is, involves living in the heart of downtown Calgary, getting to experience and engage with, the vibrant cultural diversity, which makes not only our community within Calgary, but in fact, all communities across Alberta livable and sustainable. So then if you kind of, do a really quick dive into my professional background, it's also not typical. I've spent more than 9 years in the retail industry, building a professional background that's involved things like sales, marketing, management, strategic planning, to then my immensely rewarding and unforgettable experiences having formerly served as a director of fund development, director of business development, committee member and volunteer coordinator for nonprofit organizations within the city of Calgary, which through all of my volunteer roles has allowed me to advocate for strong positive change within Calgary and throughout the province for LGBTQ2S plus individuals, with a focus on breaking down barriers for transgender and gender diverse Albertans. And then through my volunteer work even further, it has also allowed me, and I've been so fortunate to have connected with some of the most absolutely remarkable and inspiring individuals within our community. So ultimately a wide range of professional and lived experience, which provides me with a pretty diverse and unique outlook on both the cultural and economic dynamics, which are not only just here within Calgary, but throughout Alberta. And that kind of really rolls up into what you first put forward, which is now we find me in the present of navigating my intention towards putting my name on the ballot in 2021 for a seat on Calgary Council.
That's so cool. And I really like what you said about, bringing the community together. And I think having been born in Alberta and growing up here and stuff like that, I think for a while there's been like a division between rural and like city folk, but I don't think there has to be. Like, I think at the base of it, we're all community minded. And yeah, can you share with us what ward you're thinking about running for so we can kind of get out the vote when the time comes, or is that not something you can do?
No, that is totally something you can do, or I guess I can do. So currently, right now, the ward in which I am intent on running in is Ward 8. So Ward 8 is probably one of our most diverse wards within the city of Calgary. You have everything from the most wealthiest of the community of Calgary. If you're looking up in, say, a community like Mount Royal, you also have New Canadians and some of our, most lowest earners in the city also within the community. So you get this really big mix, and you get everything in between. You also get young families. You also get students. You get, single individuals who are maybe just starting out, young professionals. So you really get everything within Ward 8, which honestly I absolutely love. Because everything is no day is ever going to be the same. No issue is ever going to be the same. And yeah, you get to touch with everything that makes our city great, and deal with all of the great diversity that makes Calgary what Calgary is, quite frankly. So Ward 8 is where I'm running, and I could not be more proud and more honored to be considering to run, to serve and represent the constituents within that ward.
That's so cool. That's awesome. And yeah, you mentioned, there's like diverse incomes, diverse backgrounds. And so money is something that we talk about here on the podcast, obviously. Janine and I have, a pretty big passion for personal finance, but we also think, it's personal finance first. And it can get pretty political based on what your background in it is in the community you come from. So you mentioned you're an LGBTQ2S plus advocate. Is that correct to say it's like that?
That is 110% correct. And, we can even expand on that and say that, yes, I'm an advocate, but I'm also a transgender woman.
Cool. Yeah. And so as a transgender woman and as an advocate, if things were different when you were growing up, what do you think would have helped you to remove either personal financial barriers or barriers within like the political framework, within the framework of society as it is today, maybe as it was 10 years ago, everything that's kind of imposed on us, be it sort of like the cultural norms of like being misogynist and transphobic. And I don't even like transphobic. I'm starting to say like anti-LGBTQ2S plus, because it's not a phobia. It's just being like horrible. But anyway, my main question is, what would have helped you? What are the biggest barriers that would have helped you in life? And how are you trying to make that easier for like the next generation, those who come after you?
If I start with answering that question on a personal note, I've been fortunate to be able to experience some success in my life, but the reality is that I also know what it's like to worry about keeping a roof over my head or putting food on the table. And a lot of that comes from, especially early on in my transition, where maybe you're not, to use a very outdated and gross term, quote unquote, passable. It does create this barrier to gaining employment and making beyond, minimum wage, or actually being able to make a income that's going to, pay your rent, pay your food bill, heck, even paying for things like a transit pass. So from a personal side, I definitely am not, one of these individuals that, comes from a family of privilege, or comes from money, or anything like that. So I've in my later, in the last few years, yes, I have experienced some success, but have worked really hard to get there. But now, I mean, the reality is I am in that same boat with, I think, the last number that was out. I think there's 8 million Canadians who are currently on the CERB who have either been laid off or their job is no longer existent because of the pandemic. I am in that boat. So to start with answering it on a bit more of a personal, side of finance. And, when we also think about personal finance, so many people talk about, having, things like savings and, retirement plans and all of these things, which, yeah, that definitely is maybe on folks' mind. But again, when you are just maybe barely, living paycheck to paycheck, the last thing you're going to be doing is, tucking away money for, a rainy day, because quite literally that $10 or $20 or even $100, whatever the case may be, that needs to go towards paying for groceries for the next 2 weeks, or paying for your transit pass so that you can get around the city for the month. So for marginalized individuals, because this is also not just a unique problem for the gender and sexually diverse community. This is a issue which plagues and impacts, single mothers or new Canadians or, BIPOC individuals within our community. This is not just a woman's issue. This, almost could be, argumentatively, if we're going to talk about things like a universal basic income, potentially we could start, making an argument that it might actually be a human rights issue, so that people can actually be able to put food on their table and a roof over their head. I think that's defined by the United Nations as, being basic human rights that we need to ensure that we're doing. So if I digress a little bit, if we want to look at it a bit more through the political sense, for, say, the next generation who are coming up following me or following any diverse candidate, really, financial barriers are a hurdle that many candidates who maybe don't necessarily fit that typical mold face. And again, not just for gender and sexually diverse candidates, but also for candidates of color and candidates that are not financially well off or have access to donors with deep pockets. The unfortunate thing is, yes, it does take money to run a campaign. It does take money to get elected. As much as we would love that for that not to be the case, that's just the reality of the system that we kind of have to work within in order to get in to kind of change the system, if that makes sense. There are also a broad range of social and economic factors that make it substantially harder for non-privileged candidates in all elections, whether that's local, provincial, or federal. Every woman or diverse individual who has ran for councilor, member of the Legislative Assembly, member of Parliament, or really anyone who's come forward as a candidate for a public servant position has had to deal with overcoming unique barriers and challenges in some way, shape, or form. And even those not in politics, we have had at some point to deal with barriers within our lives that may not be a reality for someone else. So it really is a cultural issue, in addition to being a financial issue, but it really is a cultural issue. And, it's looking at things like continued inequality of women in the workplace, or the allowance of disgusting vitriol or threats of violence or assault against women, especially those whom are in politics or public life. All you have to do is open your Twitter feed and go to pretty much any female politician or someone who is serving in the public life, and it won't take you long to see some of the vile that is being thrown towards them. So we can't allow this to continue. And there also isn't necessarily really one barrier which is going to kind of open the floodgates. We need to be doing better on all fronts. And while, yes, progress has been made, work still remains to be done. We need more diversity and inclusion within politics. So we need more women. We need more people of color. We need more folks from all financial walks of life, not just people who either they have built a tremendous amount of financial success or they come from a tremendous amount of financial success. And we need those diverse individuals participating in the conversation to help build our city, our province, and our country in a way that works for everyone. And, there are amazing programs, such as one which I participated in, and I'm so honored to have had the chance. It's Ask Her YYC. And then there's also one up in Edmonton called Parity YEG. And both are aimed at helping women prepare for getting more involved in running politically, or even working on a campaign, but starting to see more women identified individuals. I also should just clarify for listeners, it's for LGBTQ2S plus women, along with cisgendered women as well. So really, it starts with you, it starts with me, it starts with our whole community. We can ask her to run, or we can ask her to get involved, or to put her name forward, but then we also have to be ready to support her, to fund her, to fundraise for her, to do all of these things that are actually going to help her, or help any diverse candidate get across the finish line. Because again, that's how we will then be able to bring forth change once we get these folks in there.
Absolutely. And I think that you hit on so many really important points. One thing I wanted to dig into a little bit further, you said that earlier on in your life you did a transition. And so I guess Tara and I had done some research, and I think it was last year in maybe season 2, where we were looking at some of the employer benefits and health plans for companies across Canada and the US. And we had heard that some of these employer sponsored plans didn't cover things like gender reassignment, surgeries, or medication for transition, whether that's hormones or something else. So I'm wondering if you're able to speak to the financial impact of that transition for you, just because I don't know if we've ever been able to ask someone that question.
Yeah. So personally, and again, it can range it can definitely, vary depending on a person's individual personal circumstance. However, again, for myself and personally, I pay out of pocket for my hormones. Really, it has only ever been at the mercy of if I happen to be working for an employer who happens to have health benefits, which not every employer offers their employees. So there have been a few moments since I began transitioning 10 years ago where I have worked for an employer that did have a health coverage plan. But even then, it's not it's not full coverage, which again, even for LGBT medical issues, it's not always fully covered. But for the most part, throughout most of my transition, I have paid out of pocket for my hormones, and especially early on, it was taking things like testosterone blockers, plus taking the hormone patch. So there were 2 hormones, plus in addition to also taking and having to pay for medications for severe anxiety, for depression, for other, mental health challenges, which again, kind of we're all a part of the package when you're navigating a world that is not designed or reflective of who you are as an individual. Right. So again, if we go back to that whole, so if you're barely making minimum wage, and you're having to pay your rent, you're having to put food on your table. Now you're also having to pay for medication, which could easily, I think at the height of when I've paid for medication has been like maybe an extra like $120, $130 a month. So again, it's now there are some folks, again, this has not been my experience, but there are some folks who, they have an office job, or they have a corporate job, or whatever circumstances they manage to find themselves in, that, they do have medical benefits. And so a portion of that is covered, plus they might also be making more than, say, someone who is working in retail, or working in a restaurant, or or is even unemployed, actually, which is another very sad reality for a lot of LGBTQ2S plus individuals, is struggling to find gainful employment. So it really depends. The unfortunate narrative is that, yeah, it does cost money. And even if you have that medical coverage for prescription medication, which thankfully we do live in Canada, where we do have universal health care, so we do have coverage for stuff like that. But if we look at within Canada, say things like after you go for surgery, and then you have aftercare costs. So if you're off work, in my case, I had some really severe complications, which saw me off work for the better part of a year. There was no coverage for that. The job that I had at the time was not a full-time job. It did not have short-term or long-term disability. So quite literally, I was relying and thanks be to whatever out there you believe in, that I did have, someone who was able to step up a little bit to make sure that I, was able to keep a roof over my head and food on the table. But still, there are lots of costs that people don't necessarily think. You also have to factor in things like laser hair removal, which is not cheap. Most folks will, more than likely end up spending anywhere between $1,000 to $2,000 on laser hair removal. That is not that's not a reality, a financial reality that most transgender individuals find themselves being able to do. And then you also have clothing. Like, it's not like you just when you're transitioning, it comes with a new wardrobe. It's not like the universe hands that to you. No, you have to go out and start buying these affirming clothing articles, whether that's new undergarments, new work clothes, new, like, all of that, right? So there's a lot of costs that people don't necessarily think of that come with transitioning. It is expensive and can be very expensive. And so luckily here in Calgary, though, we are so fortunate to have an organization such as Skipping Stone, which does do a lot of work within the transgender community, and does try and alleviate some of these burdens which transgender and gender diverse Calgarians, and in fact Albertans, come across. And in addition to Skipping Stone, there is also Exo Treatment Room here within Calgary, who has also stepped up and is providing a decrease in cost for services such as laser hair removal for trans and gender diverse individuals. So, the community is definitely changing, and I'm so thankful to see that. But again, it was not a reality that I had 10 years ago when I was starting out.
Right. Yeah. I was born a woman and have obviously seen how expensive that can be. And that's not including any of those medications or surgeries, or having to buy a completely new wardrobe at any point in time in my life, or having to pay thousands of dollars for laser hair removal. So I can only imagine the financial burden. And Tara and I have talked about this before, but whether it's $2,000 on CERB or a universal basic income that is a living wage, which I guess in Calgary is around $19 an hour, you're not getting that much extra out of your budget when it comes to, having that small amount of money, to be honest, in a large metropolitan city being deposited into your bank account.
Absolutely not. No one is getting rich off of this. Like, no one is living, high on the hog on the CERB. I also know, I'm in the boat where I would love to be back to work. There is nothing that I would enjoy more. I actually, I go quite stir crazy. So this other argument that, people on CERB, they're never going to go back to work. Well, that would be wrong. I very much am eager to get back to work.
I hate that. It drives me wild when people say that. And I'm like, maybe if you weren't such a terrible employer and you paid your employees a little bit better, they would come back to work. But that's a whole nother conversation.
But you hit it right. You hit the nail right on the head. It's that there isn't a whole lot extra. I think if you're looking like downtown or even central Calgary, I think rent is maybe average $1,100, $1,000 to $1,100, depending upon on where you're looking. Maybe that's a bit high, but probably not by much. So okay, so let's say it is $1,000, you get $2,000 a month. So there goes $1,000. Let's say you have a phone so that you can actually connect with folks and do things. I think that's a pretty basic basic need by folks to be able to connect with their community. Let's say maybe you have internet so that you can do things. Maybe you're doing online schooling. Maybe you're working online. Maybe you've managed to find a job that you can work remotely, but you do need internet in order to connect with things. So there's phone internet, which is going to eat into it. Then you also have to get things like groceries. Maybe your work isn't remote. Maybe you are having to transfer take transit to your job. So you need a bus pass, like all of these things, it goes very quickly. Like it is not actually a lot of money. And so, yeah, folks, you can definitely tell folks that aren't navigating the CERB because, yeah, they have a very warped perception of what it actually is like being on the CERB or even EI or really any kind of social income support. It for me personally, again, some folks, but for me, it's like I'm qualified, I'm educated, I'm ready, willing, and able. I would much rather actually be working to make it rather than be on a social assistance program like all of that. So yeah. There's my 2 cents on the CERB.
Yeah, and something you had said, Anna, when you were talking about all the additional costs, like it got me thinking about, pharmacare and stuff as well, because I've noticed some comments from people in the disabled community or people with disabilities or advocates. They're saying, $2,000, like it doesn't get you a heck of a lot. And, sometimes all of that money needs to go to things just to help you to live. And so when we're talking about hormones, and I think of, all the hormones that I have taken for like birth control, or when you're talking about things that you need for mental health care, like that kind of thing, if we had a basic income to ensure that like we had food on the table for everybody, and that also that without prejudice or judgment, people were just able to get the pharmaceuticals that they need for whatever reason, like full stop. I just don't understand. Sometimes I think about these things and I just don't understand why there's a line of you need to be employed by somebody who has decided to, buy into a national like benefit insurer, because it's all insurance anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or that you have to be working to be able to feed yourself, or you have to be working, and some of these things, like you need food to live, you need medication to live. I personally don't think there's anything so different about almost any kind of medication as to say like insulin. It's just a different kind of life need, but it's still allowing you to live. Yeah.
Yeah, it very much is a matter of, yes, I mean, these are these prescriptions or, these services. And I know, for some listeners, they might be thinking, oh, well, laser hair removal, well, that is, that's so vain or oh,
frivolous,
well, it's a beauty, right? Yeah, frivolous. And it's like, well, no, if you are transitioning from male to male, hormones do not even really touch your facial hair. And if, depending on when you started hormones, that could, you could have a full beard, and even with shaving and cover up, your 5 o'clock shadow is going to come through. And again, she's a very, very, very outdated and gross, disgusting term, quote unquote, passable. That can be a barrier between you and getting hired for a job, because the employer won't want, again, they'll be having their reservations, because we know for a fact that 80% of out trans individuals within the workplace receive harassment and discrimination within the workplace. That's if they have a job. That is not even those who don't have a job and are maybe beginning to transition. So this is not a frivolous service. This is actually something that this individual needs to both and first and foremost be affirmed in who they are as an individual, and that should, above all else, like, that should just be full stop, end of conversation. Unfortunately, it usually isn't. So the other part of that is, this is actually a service that is not covered through Alberta Health, and is out of pocket. And the reality is, without that service, there are barriers and challenges which that individual is going to be met with. So again, the argument is moot, but people, yes, they hear laser hair removal and they think that, it's frivolous or in vain. And it's like, no, actually, this is a service that is actually required. I wish it wasn't. It's like, yeah, maybe we should be having a broader conversation of how do we as a society move beyond these preconceived beauty standards and notions of women or men or whoever, and maybe we should just live and let live and not really care about what somebody looks like on the outside. I mean, that actually is probably the bigger conversation we should be having, but because that really blows people's minds, we'll just start with, hey, we need to make sure that the service is accessible to folks.
Yeah. And I feel like people who have that argument are probably not women with hair that is not like standard to society's conventional like beauty standards. Like as a lady who's like grown up with that, because my background's like Portuguese, and we come out a little bit different. I feel like those people, like, they clearly just don't get it. I don't know. I feel like people, it would be nice if people didn't care what my eyebrows looked like, or if every, inch of us was like plucked and stuff like that. But at the same time, you have to allow women to be able to like live in the society that we have now. And laser hair removal for trans ladies is like, that should be a no-brainer. That should absolutely be a no-brainer. Like, we all buy magazines. We know what we're dealing with here. Like, let's start chipping away at it. But this is what we need now. For sure. For sure. Oh, sorry. That just made me really angry. Like, I don't know how a woman could say to another woman that, like, this is not something you very clearly need to make it in society. And that whole horrible notion of passing and stuff like that, but it is. And I feel like every lady knows that. You have to know that at some level. Anyway, I get a little angry and shouty if you didn't listen to our past episodes.
No, well, you know what, to make a really, again, I'm going to, give a huge shout out, Annie Graham, Exo Treatment Room. She recognized that very much all that we've, just been talking about as related to this. She recognized all of that, hey, this actually is something that we need to make sure that we're making happen for these kiddos and youth and people. So she has stepped up. She is a gem within the community, and is making it happen for trans and gender diverse folks, realizing that, has nothing to do with vanity. This is literally a service that can actually be life-saving, like really being affirmed in who you are and feeling that can actually make the difference between somebody, but between life and death for folks. That's not dramatic. That is actually a strong, tangible reality.
Yeah.
So Annie is one of our gems within the community, and an absolute amazing individual who recognizes that. And I absolutely love her for it.
That's amazing. I'm definitely going to check them out. I haven't really been going a lot of places during COVID, but
good news is she is also doing virtual facials. So if you, again, the total just for like, she actually does like have a skin and facial company. And so, like, she, throughout this entire pandemic, she pivoted and started doing like online facials. So she does like online consultations, and then she makes your own special care and thing. And so anyways, there's a little shout out that if you're in the need for the best of the best in terms of skincare and just an amazing rad facialist, go see Annie. And she has a cute little dog named Sprinkles too. So like the cutest door greeter in all of Calgary.
I do love a good pup.
He is adorable. He will, he steals the show ever so wonderfully, because he's just this cute little fluff ball of a Pomeranian.
Amazing. That's so cute. Yeah, I can't wait to visit. Getting back to you're looking to be elected in Calgary, and what we've talked about with, kind of creating like a big picture equitable society, what do you think is, I don't know, if you could pick the most impactful piece of policy and you could just, push it through on your first day in office when you get elected, what do you think that piece of policy would be that would be the first major step to creating an equitable city of Calgary?
I'm laughing because I've thought a lot about this, of how we do that. And in order to create an equitable Calgary for everyone, we first must listen to all Calgarians and to have everyone at the table creating meaningful and compassionate dialogue about the type of city we want to live in. Any policy that is being put forward has to be put through a lens of intersectionality. Again, if we look at Ward 8, yes, there's a tremendous amount of diversity within that ward, but if we expand that out to the city of Calgary, there is so much diversity and cultural and socioeconomic, all of these different things, right? So any policy has to be put through that lens. Calgary is, as I just mentioned, it's diverse. It's a passionate city. We are also incredibly passionate. I was never interested in hockey before I moved to Calgary, and I moved to Calgary, and all of a sudden I'm like, yes, I love when the Flames win. Like we're a passionate city and community here. And so our biggest, one of our biggest resources that contributes to the energy within our community within Calgary is our people. During COVID-19 and during the pandemic, and even before, small businesses have endured a tremendous amount of adversity and have not received much in terms of meaningful and tangible support, both from the provincial and federal government. Even, they've received a small little bit from municipal government, but even then, not a whole heck of a lot. They're still kind of, standing out, left in the cold, being like, hey, what about us? Literally, we employ, throughout Canada, SMEs employ 80% of our workforce. Within Alberta alone, I think 91 or 92% of business within Alberta is small and medium enterprise. So they're kind of sort of going like, hey, like we're hurting, like not like we're not complaining. We need some tangible, meaningful support. Otherwise, we're not going to survive. And if we lose that, well, now we're going to see a whole lot more folks out of a job, unemployed. We're going to see kind of that energy within our communities. I live just off of 17th Avenue. And so I see that energy. People are going out, getting, their coffee from the local coffee shop, whether that's Analog or wherever. So all of that, right? Like we need to ensure that our lifeblood of our community, which is small business and entrepreneurs, are able to survive. So yeah, we need to be ensuring that we keep them alive and supported so that we can see them flourishing and also building for sustainable and livable communities as a result. But, the other thing, because I was very acutely aware when I was kind of, pondering this, and I've, again, been pondering it pretty much for the last 7 months as I've been going about this road of, how do we do this? How do we do this? And again, part of it has to be, us building for our community, our city, and our plan, and really having all of those voices being heard and then moving forward together. So along with the support of small business, and if we, again, looking at that equitable factor, we also need to be ensuring that we're creating that equity through frontline services and support for which we are putting towards community organizations and programs. So seeing greater access to food security within, say, a community such as Sanelta, or seeing public transit access to communities in our far north or deep south. So that's a really long about way of saying there is no one policy that is more important than the other. Rather, it really is about building a platform especially as a candidate, it is about building a platform and engaging on multiple policies, which will be bringing forth greater equity to our communities, getting out into the community and hearing, hey, what is important to you? What matters to you, your family, your neighbors, and what do we need to do to make that happen? And that is what I would be getting to work on October 22nd, 2021, which is the day after the election. And, the intention is to win on that day. So I would be, going to work the next day and starting work on all that.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. I like that you brought up the small businesses, the local businesses. I think I touched on it in our initial COVID episode in March or April. But I've noticed historically when we see these shocks, when something happens to the local communities where we're not able to pull together and kind of fight back against big multinationals or big nationals, and they say they're going to bring jobs and they say they're going to be doing this, that, and the other. They're globally subsidized through what we can see as wage suppression and inequity from country to country and jurisdiction to jurisdiction, with places that don't have the same safety standards that we do and the same minimum wages that we do. We can see that they're nationally subsidized in some cases if they're big enough. We can see that they're provincially subsidized. So then we have our local homegrown, hashtag YYC businesses, and we have nothing to give back. I mean, I don't even know how you do that in the municipal framework, since you're only, working off of a property tax base. And it's the residential folks are going to get hit hard. Yeah, the local businesses are going to get hard. But I mean, when do we start ensuring that we have a strong enough base of local businesses, and then also, maybe some way to recoup some of those benefits that these multinationals, nationals, and just very wealthy corporations have lobbied for? When do we start bringing them back and ensuring that, the products that we buy that are not, this is a shit way to say it, but, that are not really from here. When do we see that is coming back to the everyday Calgarian? Is there a way? Yeah. What would you do about that, I guess? Because it's something I see as being a big problem.
Yeah, well, there's a lot in there. To touch very quickly on, big multinational, these big, huge corporations, they are also not being immune to the impact. Arlene Dickinson, who is a phenomenal Calgarian and community member here within the community of Calgary and throughout Alberta, and is just, again, amazing woman, posted on her story the other day that, Victoria's Secret has declared bankruptcy. That was they are huge. I think they're owned by L Brands, who their owner is one of the 10 richest individuals in the world. Zara has closed 1,200 stores. Chanel, Hermes, and Rolex, these are three of the biggest, hugest fashion brands in the world. They've stopped production, so they're not even producing anything new right now. Nike is getting ready to stage 2 refundancies. Airbnb founder says that due to the pandemic, 12 years of effort have been destroyed in 6 weeks. Starbucks has announced the permanent closure of 400 stores, which, and again, we think, oh, Starbucks, yeah, they're probably all over the place. No, we've actually lost quite a few within the community of Calgary. I know I've chatted with a few folks, and I lost my local Starbucks. And whenever I hear that, I'm like, well, technically that's kind of an oxymoron. A local Starbucks, they're not actually. Anyways, I'm I'm not too sad about the Starbucks. We do have some really great, amazing local coffee shops that you could go to. But again, these are huge. I was literally walking down 17th Avenue, and I think it was a secondary Tim Hortons stop that I was just walking past, and I kind of noticed. I'm like, whoa, they're gone, closed up, closed shop, gone, goodbye. So the big guys are also not being immune, because the the whole thing kind of sort of goes back around what we were talking earlier about is income, right? Like we currently have, again, I'm pretty sure it hasn't shifted much, but at the height of the pandemic, we had 8 million Canadians who were unemployed, who were accessing the CERB. So that's $2,000 a month. Again, we've already gone through the whole, that's not a lot of money. So even if you want to, like, I would love to be down shopping on 17th Avenue, supporting local businesses like Rubaiyat or Leo, or over in Englewood, supporting, stores like Limoncello, or Cody and Sue, or all of these places, even restaurants, like all of these things. I would love it. I would love to be doing it every single day. I can't. Like, I actually financially can't do it because I don't have the means to right now. So, I mean, I've been, supporting them through like social media and sharing their stuff. But again, it's like, that's not money in their bank account. So what can we do at a municipal level? First and foremost, what we need to do, and I think you touched a little bit on it, when we talk about property taxes, and that is going to be a hot button issue this election. We know that. Many Calgarians, they're feeling the pinch of property taxes. Now, again, to say that, hey, I'm gonna slash property taxes. Well, that's not productive, because guess what we have to do if we're gonna slash property taxes? We also have to slash services such as public transit, and road maintenance, or even green space maintenance. So maintaining our parks, which, hey, guess what? We're utilizing a heck of a lot more these days because we can't spend too much time inside. We're utilizing our parks. What we really need to do, and it was just released, they had an independent advisory council on property taxes, and kind of sort of putting a new way forward if we look at taxation. Now, for any listener that is thinking, oh, so they're just going to create new taxes, they're just going to tax me to death. No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is we need to look at doing, our tax system is broken. Our way about in which we go collecting taxes is broken. We do need to look at maybe a creative new way, new solutions of how we go about addressing taxation. Now, the flip side of that is, because any listener who kind of has a general sense of how government works will be listening going like, Anna, you can't do that. You're municipal. Correct. We actually can't. It actually is within the Municipal Government Act of how municipalities do collect revenue. Very much so. Like, municipalities actually can't run a deficit. For anyone who didn't know that, municipalities actually can't budget for debt. So what does that mean? Well, we need to see municipality and the provincial government working together, which I think it could be safely said that we haven't really seen a whole lot of. We maybe have seen a little bit of it, but not a whole heck of a lot. Nothing tangible and nothing meaningful when it comes to a collaborative relationship between the province and the city. Now, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, in terms of the argument of, oh, well, the province's fault versus the municipality's fault. You know what? I don't care whose fault it is. I'm not interested in arguing whose fault it is. Let's be adults. Let's be, people who are in a position to make change, and let's just move on with life and make it happen. I don't care whose fault it is. Let's fix it. But you do need to have that collaboration in order for the province to kind of sort of change the MGA, the Municipal Government Act, to really kind of allow municipalities to kind of sort of get a bit more creative in exploring, hey, how do we address this issue of taxation in terms of collecting revenue when we understand that the system itself is broken? So we need to look at that. And literally, they just did, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, an independent advisory council here within Calgary. They released an independent report on kind of some ways of how we would go about doing that. So that would be one of the very first things that I would be getting down to in office, is getting a really deep dive into this report and starting to build that collaborative relationship with the provincial government to make some of this stuff happen. Because we can't just shift all of the responsibility onto business, which quite frankly is exactly what this city has done for a lot of years. That's one of the reasons why we're in such a tight spot for taxes. So we can't do that. The same can be said. We can't just now shift it all onto residential owners, because, well, hey, guess what? Residential owners aren't making as much money. So even if it is like our property taxes haven't actually gone up a huge amount in the last decade. I think over the last 10 years, they've in total gone up by like $1,000, which actually really isn't a huge lot if we spread it out over that course of time. But again, we need to look at, if we were looking at ways of doing things differently, which how many times in the course of this pandemic have we heard from folks saying, we need to do things differently? Well, maybe we should start doing things differently rather than just saying, let's do things differently. Let's actually have a conversation and see how we can actually make that happen. And the framework is already there. Like the report is already released. They literally have their recommendations. It would just be about working, like, again, building that relationship, that collaborative relationship with the province to make some of this happen. Like it's right there. They've literally done the work. We don't even need to wait, spend time or money doing the report. It's already done. It's literally there. We just need the power to actually bring some of these recommendations forward.
Yeah, so that kind of like leads into my next question, because talking about the local businesses that have been disrupted because of COVID, the residential property owners that have maybe lost income and that kind of thing because of COVID. So we know through some statistics before COVID that there are financial disparities, inequity in terms of like gaining income, getting wealth, that kind of thing. So I think you noted that COVID had been particularly financially devastating to the LGBTQ2S plus community.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just like kind of take us through what has happened?
So EGAL Canada, so EGALE Canada, put out a report that essentially went and looked at how are Canadians who identify as LGBTQ2S plus being impacted due to COVID comparatively to non-LGBTQ2S plus Canadians. And they focused it on a few different avenues, but a lot of it actually was specifically targeted towards things such as their current financial status, the financial position of their household, getting a new job, job loss, all of that. And the really short summary of that report is that we see in data, in tangible, actual, data-driven, factual-based evidence that LGBTQ2S plus Canadians are being more adversely impacted than non-LGBTQ2S plus Canadians when it comes to the effects of COVID-19. Now, that is not me saying that, other Canadians are not hurting who aren't. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. What I'm saying and what this report says, that's the other thing, it's also not me, it's actually a factual national study and data-driven evidence that literally says this is a reality, we need to be addressing this. So one of the biggest numbers that was quite stark is 53% of LGBTQ2S Canadians do not feel confident about their current financial situation. This compared to 40% of non-LGBTQ2S plus Canadians. So that is a huge number. Like that is, because again, this is nationwide. This is not just for the province of Alberta or Ontario or BC. This is nationwide. And so that is a huge number again, and comparatively to non-LGBTQ Canadians. So, well, what can we do to kind of bring about better better financial solutions, better opportunities for job creation, municipalities or communities that are more reflective and create better equality. At both a municipal and provincial level, we can create support for preventative community programming. Also, at both levels, we can provide funding to nonprofit organizations. So some of those within Calgary would be things like Skipping Stone, YYC Outlink, Queer Arts Society, Calgary Pride. all of these things that are doing work within our community to advocate and promote and create equitable spaces within our communities. The government can also advocate and be in support of and create legislation which would protect and promote, say, the creation and establishing of GSAs and parent groups. Which, why is that important? Well, because we know that they help prevent LGBTQ2S plus youth homelessness and mental health challenges. So we know factual data that if a youth is supported very early on and they feel empowered, that's only going to help promote them in later on in life. So this is going to help them feel confident when they're going out to get a job. This is going to help them not being, navigating mental health challenges, which might, be creating a barrier for them going out and finding employment. So that's what we can do. Now that's a bit more at a provincial level as opposed to a municipal level, but we certainly can be in support of it at a municipal level. We can also create drop-in youth programs that are LGBTQ2S friendly, but also specifically targeted towards LGBTQ2S plus individuals within our community. We can also engage with LGBTQ2S plus youth and adults through internships or advisory councils. One really great example is actually the City of Grand Prairie's Youth Council, which actually has advocated for further protections with the province as is related to LGBTQ2S plus students, along with developed a documentary called Redneck Rainbow. So the other thing that we can do, so we know people are unemployed, and we know that this unemployment is obviously contributing to their lack of confidence in their financial situation. We know that hiring practices aren't always necessarily the most inclusive and can actually create a barrier to creating diversity within the workplace. So specifically at a municipal level, we can support more inclusive workspaces by providing mandatory training for employees to increase their understanding of LGBTQ2S plus identities, to develop empathy and increase knowledge of human rights, and improve their ability to foster safer, more respectful workplace environments. Additionally, we can actually examine current hiring and promotion practices and identify areas that need to be improved in order to foster more inclusive and diverse workspaces, which authentically reflect the everyday citizens for which they are responsible to serve. Again, you'll remember earlier in our conversation, I said, transgender and gender diverse individuals see 80% of those whom are out, quote unquote, experience workplace discrimination or harassment. To the point of, if I can get personal for a moment, I can remember being very early on and being out. At that point, I had pretty much made the sacrifice to dress as androgynously as possible. I cut my hair into a very short haircut. It was kind of reminiscent of Jennifer Goodwin in Once Upon a Time. So it was kind of short, kind of feminine, but not really. It was terrible on me. But I did that in order to get hired for a job. And it was very shortly after that they found out actually that I was transgender, and very quickly fired me from that job. So again, this is the reality of why it is so important that we create inclusive workspaces. Even looking at things like, gendered washroom signage. I know that's not, a huge ta-da thing, but it can be when you're walking into, say, an employer or a workspace and you see that, hey, these aren't gendered washrooms. So that's going to be more affirming and more welcoming to, say, someone who is non-binary, who does not identify for a specific gender identity. So policy is merely a starting point. Like, that's the other thing, is governments don't have all the answers. Diversity is often celebrated within Canadian municipalities and is seen as a positive asset within our communities. I don't think, for most people, they wouldn't argue that diversity isn't a positive asset for our communities. But diversity itself, and knowing that we have diversity, does not automatically result in inclusion. And that's what we need to be seeing here. We need to, as a community, intentionally foster and develop and continually cultivate inclusion seeing communities becoming ones which celebrate and promote, vibrant cultural diversity, which we know makes them livable and sustainable. And that's a role that all governments have to take a leadership position on, and are proactively assessing and anticipating in removing barriers that may prevent diverse individuals, not just sexually and gender diverse individuals, but all diverse or marginalized individuals. We need to be removing these barriers from them accessing equitable access and having participation and equal opportunity within our communities.
Yeah, I love that. I'm really glad that you touched on the difference between, accepting diversity, but then actual inclusion. It's huge. And if the bathroom conversation ever comes up in Calgary, I know moms are often weaponized against it for some stupid reason. If you ever need a mom gender neutral washroom advocate, like, I'm all here for it. If we could all have gender neutral washrooms from the word go, I think it would actually do a lot to, end harassment towards all women, personally. If you just, from the get-go, look at everyone as your equal and not have to like segregate people to like go to the washroom, it's just, it's so unbelievable. So
And
yeah.
I'll second that for sure.
Yeah,
I'll be a mom in November, so.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been interesting being pregnant in the pandemic, but
Yeah.
I will also make some heads roll if you need.
Yeah.
Well, and because it very much is still a thing. And I go back very early on in my transition. And I had to actually, they don't do it anymore, or at least to my knowledge, I don't believe they do it anymore. But I actually had to have a carrying letter from my doctor that literally said that I was legally allowed to use the women's washroom.
Fucking kidding. Oh.
And the reason for that is because, let's say I was in a mall and I walked into a washroom, and let's say, a mom or somebody had issue and took issue with that, and, asked for security or whatever. Without that letter, I actually could have been charged or could have, been removed or banned from the property or all of these different things. And it was very, I'm pretty confident at a provincial level, actually, we did move forward. We always call it bathroom legislation. Well, it's actually not bathroom legislation. You're actually providing basic human rights to people so that they can use a bathroom. It's not bathroom legislation, it's a human rights legislation. But anyways, so yeah, like I can still remember that. And the sad thing is that I know, talking to kiddos even today, that yeah, they still feel anxiety, or they still get met with harassment or violence going into a bathroom or a change room, even at school, all of those different things, right? So that's just, again, a proactive approach that a municipality can kind of sort of take to, again, is that going to solve the financial issue? No, it's not. That's not going to be what creates it. But what that does is that starts to create inclusion. And what that does is folks start to see themselves represented within their community. They start to look around and see, hey, I belong in this space. I matter. I'm valid. I'm valued in this space. Do you have any idea of what that empowerment alone does to an individual? They all of the sudden feel like they have the world on a string, to quote Frank Sinatra. But it sounds cheesy and corny and Hallmark movie-ish, but it is so true. Like, just these what we would think as maybe little things can actually be huge, and having that then starts to then feel empowered to, maybe they come forward and like, hey, I can be a doctor, I can be a lawyer, I can be mayor, never mind counselor, I'm going to be mayor. And that's what this does. So it's not maybe necessarily a direct, this is going to get money into your pocket policy, but it is something that is going to start changing our community and our society so that folks start to see themselves reflected and empowered so that they can be successful later on in life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I for sure get that. I think we need to, at the same time, change society and legislation, but I think oftentimes we need to have that public opinion behind us before we can, put it on the books, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And unless Janine has something else, I think my last question for you would be, we've mentioned it several times on our podcast. There's a bunch of issues we can't really speak to from experience, like being white cis het ladies. But for those of us who are not members of the LGBTQ2S plus community, and who don't face as many barriers in the workplace or, just in day-to-day life, what is it that we can do to start being inclusive on a day-to-day basis?
First and foremost, it starts with opening up the conversation. I can remember I was reading an article, and it was actually talking about getting more women involved in politics. And it was approached from a very, very, very cisgendered, very heterosexual kind of sort of a typical kind of sort of lens. And I was sitting there and I was reading it, and I was, again, it was kind of resonating, but then I kind of sort of went, whoa, like it got to a point where it was talking about, it was either financial barriers or something. And it really didn't resonate because I was reading it. I'm like, well, that's not my reality, because I actually have a different set of barriers or challenges, because yes, I'm a woman, but I also happen to be transgender, which comes with its own unique set of barriers and challenges. And so that's what got me thinking. And I actually wrote an article on it for Madam Premier, who is, again, another phenomenal local business, which is all about women empowerment, whether that's politics or just women in general. But I wrote an article about it, and it was called Creating More Space for Transgender Women in Politics, recognizing that we need to open up the conversation. When we talk about getting women involved in politics, we need to understand that women means lesbian, gay, bi, transgender women, non-binary women, every woman identified individual or who sees themselves and knows that they're a woman when they wake up in the morning, or identifies somehow, some way as a woman. That's what the conversation needs to be. And realizing that by opening up that conversation, it doesn't take away from the feminist movement. It doesn't take away from the years of looking at, like prolific feminist moments, such as, the suffragettes movement, or, getting the right to vote, or all of these different things. It doesn't take away from it. And we need to stop creating this us versus them mentality, because at the end of the day, we really are. We are all fighting for the same thing, which is equality and inclusion within society. And the thing is by creating more space at the table, you actually get more voices that help you move your issue, your cause, your fight forward. You're no longer doing it. It's no longer 5 of you doing it. It's now 25 of you doing it, or 225 of you doing it, because you've created that space. You've created that dialogue. And also we've now learned about more individuals within our community. So that's the first thing. The next thing, and it literally just happened today, I got tagged in a tweet about there's a new kind of sort of political activism group forming or something like that. And I hadn't heard of it, but I got tagged in a tweet where literally someone had to tell them, hey, maybe you should ask some more diverse women to be a part of it. And they tagged myself. They also tagged a couple of other individuals, some BIPOC individuals, just some other diverse women. And it's like, that's the other part of it. Open the conversation, but then ask people to be a part of the conversation. Reach out and ask. Be like, hey, I'm doing this thing. Do you want to help, or could you help, or Do you want to be a part of it? Ask, because I guarantee that more oftentimes than not, we'll say yes, or at least I'll say yes. I'm pretty good at it. If someone asks me, I rarely, very rarely ever say no. And I'm more than happy. I don't claim to know everything. I really don't. But I'm open to learning. I'm open to maybe bringing a piece of a perspective that maybe no one's thought about before. And maybe through that, we move the wheel forward for every woman, every marginalized individual within our community. So those would kind of be my first things: is ask for those people to come and sit at your table, and also create that space at the table. And that can actually all be rolled all into one. By asking, you're creating the space at the table. By understanding that those voices are valid, you're creating space at the table. So that's part of it. That's really a very basic way of how you do it. And through that, well, then you start doing the bigger picture stuff. But it's starting with create room at the table for those diverse dialogues to be represented. Because if you're not even doing that, then there's very little to move on with that, because you're not even creating an opportunity for those individuals, those women, those diverse women, to be at your table. It's kind of like the cool kids in high school eating their lunch over at a table, and you want to be a part of them, but you're not allowed over at that table. So you kind of sort of go and sit off on your own, and maybe you're eating by your lonesome, and yeah, you kind of sort of have to figure it out yourself. Well, guess what? If we just invited that one kiddo over to our table to be a part of it, how much better the world would be.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I love it. I absolutely love it. I think we have a pink tax rebate at the end of every episode, and I really like that. Janine, did you have any other questions or anything?
I think one that I guess is not really related, but I'm super curious, so I'm going to ask it. How have you felt, I guess, you've been treated differently from, I guess, your experience being, I guess, identifying as a woman versus identifying as a man, and then going through transition? Like, how have people treated you through that, and what differences have you seen?
Yeah, so great question. So I never actually identified as a man.
Sorry, that was super presumptuous of me.
No. Because again, everyone's journey is unique. Like I have seen trans people that, yeah, they did identify as man, or they did, they did, and then they didn't, and that's valid. Everybody's journey is valid and so unique. But for myself personally, there was never a moment that, I looked in the mirror and was like, yeah, I identify as a boy. Or it was always, again, I didn't know what it was. I mean, I grew up in rural Alberta. The term gay was barely a part of our dialogue, of our narrative. I didn't know what that was at 5 years old or at 12 years old. Heck, I kind of barely even really knew what it meant when I was 16 years old. So, but I always knew that, I'm more identified with, girls and having more, feminine, girlfriends, rather than getting out and, rough and tumble with the boys and stuff like that. And again, I can remember being ridiculed, absolutely ridiculed, relentlessly for, being gay and not even knowing what that meant at 5 years old. At 12 years old, I didn't even know what that meant. But then again, as I started to grow in, because right? You when you wake up in the morning, you know that, yeah, you just know in your heart and your soul who you are when you look in the mirror. And when you look in the mirror and something's not quite right, you absolutely know. So I always did, like, even now, like, I mean, I have no shame or nothing to hide. I can absolutely and very easily say, yeah, I'm a transgender woman. But the reality is, when I wake up in the morning or go about my day, I just think of myself as a woman. I don't even actually really consider myself transgender. I just consider myself a woman. and have always kind of have had that. I've never even really thought of myself as trans. Just thought, yeah, I'm a woman. I just kind of maybe had to take the scenic route to get to get to where I can actually look in the mirror in the morning when, you know, I'm showering or getting dressed and not feeling like, oh my God, what's happening here? So I don't have that experience of, you know, men and in power, because the reality is I started transitioning right at 18, so right out of high school. But throughout high school, because I did it kind of in stages. Again, I grew up in rural Alberta. My father was a cowboy, worked in the energy industry. We lived on a ranch. We did all of that things, right? Like pretty stereotypical kind of, you know, rural Alberta upbringing. So to be easier on him, I did it in stages. I came out as, you know, bisexual, and well, that label didn't fit. Then I came out as gay. Well, that label didn't fit. And then finally, when I was 18 and kind of went out onto my own, and as everyone does, whether you're cisgendered, you're straight, you're gay, you're whatever, like when we go away to high school, when we leave home for the first time, we kind of sort of come into our own. We learn who we are a bit more than when we were in high school or living with our parents or however it is. So that's when I came to realize that, that, you know, the term transgender, it fits the label and what that meant medically and from a psychological standpoint, it absolutely fit. The label fit. But the reality is I've always been a woman. I just had to take the scenic route. So I never had this period where I had more privilege, say, than a woman, or had more opportunity given to me because I was a man. Now, I also am a relatively intelligent individual, and I'm very acutely aware that is, like, there are some people who have transitioned later on in their life, and the experience that they've had, and again, I am not, for anyone who is listening, I am not trying to steal anyone's story. I'm just doing the best I can to give a full representation. But for some of those folks that have transitioned later on in life, let's say maybe maybe they've been working in a corporate job, and, you know, they've been relatively successful, and, you know, they've had that typical the kind of that patriarchal, not misogynistic, that patriarchal privilege afforded to them. And then they transition, and it changes. So now not only are they getting met with barriers because they're transgender, but they're also having to navigate with being a woman, which has, again, both are going to have their own certain challenges and limitations in the workplace. Again, should it be that way? Of course, no, it shouldn't be that way, but that's the system that we're faced with, that we're trying to dismantle and build back up to being more equitable. So yeah, it definitely is a thing. It absolutely is a thing. I did not go through that. I never experienced that personally, because I did transition relatively early. Like I didn't transition after, like, when I was in my 30s or 40s or 60s. So I hadn't gone through a whole lot of life in a quote unquote male body. So yeah, but your question is valid, because my experience, again, would probably be very different for that question, say, compared to someone who transitioned later on in their life, and maybe they're in their 60s or older, or even midlife, where they're navigating that. I technically started what is late now. Like lots of kiddos can start transitioning. I mean, early, like as early as 5, I think, for some folks, which again has its benefits for sure. I transitioned at 18, so yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. I really don't. I always identified as a woman, so I always just
No, thank you for sharing. That's super insightful. Obviously, you know, 10 years ago, it was very different than what we're seeing even today.
Well, and that's the other narrative of it, right? Like 10 years ago doesn't seem like a long time ago. The reality is, for the transgender movement and non-binary and all of this, is when I first came out, there was no Laverne Cox on Orange is the New Black. There was no transgender woman, former Olympian on the cover of Vanity Fair. Say what you want, about any, but there was none of that, right? There was no My Name is Jazz on TLC and books, and there was none of that. Like, I was looking out into the landscape, because this is the other thing, when we talk about, well, politics and getting into it, this is not something that I've been working towards since I was in grade 6, or had in my mind that I've been chasing for 10 years. No, the reality is for the bulk of the last 10 years, I've been focused on surviving and overcoming a society that is not built for me as an individual, and trying to find a way to fit within it and create a space within it. But I look back to, I remember having these dreams, these big aspirations. At one point in time, I wanted to be the president of the United States, until somebody, eluded me to this thing called a constitution. And then I, thought, oh, maybe I'll settle for prime minister. That was my exact words at 12 years old. I'll settle for being prime minister of Canada. But again, and this goes back to that whole, when people can see themselves reflected in their community and they can be empowered, it is amazing what happens. Because I guarantee you, over the last 3 years have been such a polar contrast in my life, since I've undergone surgery, since a few people have supported me and got behind me and loved me, or accepted me fully as who I am within the last 3 years. It's amazing. It is absolutely amazing. So yeah, 10 years doesn't seem like a long time, but the reality is we have made leaps and bounds. In the other reality, transgender individuals have only been recognized under the Alberta Charter of Human Rights within the last 3 years. So, this is fairly new and recent. Like, it's not like we have been, I think New Zealand just celebrated 125 years since women got the right to vote. In Alberta, we're celebrating 4 years since transgender women and transgender persons have been actually identified under the Human Rights Act within our province. So, this is part of the narrative that we need to have. It's like, yeah, this isn't the way it always has been. Like, this is actually a fairly new, recent thing. But the sad thing is that transgender individuals are not new. They have been around for as long as time immemorial. And the reality is we need to look to our Indigenous individuals, the original holders of this land, because they don't call them transgender. They don't actually even refer to it as lesbian or gay or bi. They refer to them as two-spirit individuals. And they have held them in such high regard. And then colonialism came in and totally ruined that. And that's something I learned literally yesterday. I was having a phenomenal and amazing conversation, and I learned that piece of knowledge from an Indigenous individual here. And I'm so honored and privileged that she shared that piece of information with me.
That's amazing.
Because it was like, wow, like their two-spirit community in their tradition, those are the people that would protect their community when the warriors would go off, or when the men would go out off to war, or whatever the case would be. It was the two-spirit community that stayed behind and protected the women and children. It's the two-spirit that can do, because again, and I, full to all viewers, I am not Indigenous. This is just the story that I heard yesterday that I absolutely think deserves to be shared, because it was absolutely fascinating. In Indigenous culture, they need a man and a woman to do a ceremony, but two-spirit, because you have both of those spirits, you can do a ceremony yourself. So it was just so fascinating and eye-opening to me, and I greatly, sincerely thank Marilyn North Pagan for sharing with me her traditional knowledge on the Two-Spirit people, and having that conversation with me. It was fascinating, and it was eye-opening, and I am so humbled and honored to now have that info. So yeah, that's what we need to. But that's what we've lost, right? We lost that through colonialism. We've lost so much. So, because one of the arguments that people say is, oh, it's a fad. Oh, it's a new recent thing. No, it is not. It is not a fad. It is not a recent thing. It is actually something that has been around in culture long before, and not even our culture. It is actually something that is a part of the culture of Turtle Island, where we are guests, and has been a part of their culture long before we came onto this land. So this is not a fad. It is so far from being a fad. It's not even funny. That is just an ignorant way of trying to create an argument towards something that you don't understand. So yeah.
And it's so powerful to think of it that way. And I wonder, how different our society would be if that's how we treated Two-Spirit or transgender people in kind of, I guess, Western society. It's definitely something interesting. I wanted to just go back to something you said about being able to see who was in, positions of power, whether it be the president or the prime minister or what have you. And I guess this is probably a good kind of quote to wrap it up, but I remember attending a conference, and the founder of Girls Who Code was speaking as a keynote. And the one thing she said that really stuck with me, and has stuck with me for a number of years, and my hope is, for more diverse candidates to take this, steal this quote and run with it. And hopefully it resonates with you as well. But when we have those, those kids looking up to us, as I guess we're the adults now, apparently, she kind of said, you cannot be who you cannot see. And that just stuck with me so strongly. And obviously, I'm a white female, but there's so many other different types of people that are not being represented. And what does that do to the next generation coming up?
That says it right there. How can you aspire to be something that you can't see? If you're not reflected, why would you chase after that? Society's telling you that you can't do it. So that's why, it is so important to see people, again, for women, whether you're a trans woman or cisgendered woman, any kind of woman. That's why it's so important to see people like Jacinda Ardern down in New Zealand.
Love her.
Or right, she is so phenomenal. That's who I aspire to. And I love when you said, because we are apparently the adults now. It is also, it's it's kind of, well, I shouldn't say terrifying.
It's terrifying.
It is a bit terrifying, but it's also incredibly humbling when you have a kiddo come up to you and say, hey, you're going to be the first person that I vote for.
That's
and amazing. That is incredibly humbling. To lose that, I don't know how you could lose that. When somebody comes up and says, you're the very first person that I'm going to vote for, then it's my mind goes to, well, then I better do a damn good job and make you pretty proud that you voted for me, and better earn that vote. So yeah, we do. We need to create and have it so people see themselves reflected in our community, and we can do it. We can make it happen, despite everything we're seeing right now. I so strongly and vehemently believe in Calgary and in Alberta. We are a phenomenal community. We have a few hiccups that we need to iron out, but we can do it. I know we can do it, because the reality is, as I said, growing up in rural Alberta, it wasn't always me being proud. I didn't always see myself reflected or having a place of belonging. One of the greatest and most affirmed and places I have ever felt like I belonged is when I moved to Calgary. That's where I found my community.
It's amazing.
So we have it in us, Calgary, and I know we can do it.
Yeah, and I think you're going to make a lot of, people and young women very proud next election cycle. So with that, thank you so much for joining us, Anna. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. My Twitter and Instagram handle is the, like THE, Anna, ANNA, Murphy, MURPHY. So if you do the at or the search for the Anna Murphy, that'll bring up my Twitter and my Instagram. And Facebook is very much the same, except it's the real Anna Murphy, and that should bring up my Facebook. Website is currently in development so that we can have that up and going for the campaign. But follow me on social; it's all there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again for spending an hour and a half chatting with us this evening.
Oh, it has been such a privilege, and it's been such an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode.
As always, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and leave a 5-star review. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to share your money story using the hashtag FemFinances.